You keep things sometimes. I throw it everywhere. Like, you know what? I don't need it. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
And like, yeah, but it was not like a work process, it was lost. I lost a month ago. I found the original copy. I was like, come on. There were many things in school, pictures. So many.
Come back down and put the ladder back in the garage. So I don't have to look at it when I go to work in the morning.
Elementary school. And when we class recipes were kids who did recipe and the teacher put them together and gave them copies and that's cute. But they have really good stuff anyway. My mom said she make open the stuff.
All the moms put their best dish in there.
Really, it's like I had the best recipe for college from that. I found out, it's like, yeah, these kids have the recipe books. I don't even cook much, but I make much.
Okay, everyone. Yeah. All right, so we had just a couple of things that kind of came up. We wanted to talk through a little bit before going through the trouble of trying to write something in a minute. Not be helpful. I'll start with maybe an easy one, the production course. We're okay as, kind of part of the package deal to have 45 days of notice. That's something we can live with. For the layoff considerations, here's kind of what we were thinking. Put kind of the performance evaluations and length of service in the same level, as it were. And then under that, put disciplinary history, and then in employee service to the college, put and other work history. Because when we talked about what does other work history entail, kind of what you described was the example you gave sounded like service to the college. So we thought it might be reasonable to kind of put those things together. So kind of a little bit where your kind of suggestion there was to put length of service up in the list of other things. Kind of done, but then kind of also move the other stuff around a little bit.
So repeat.
Yeah, so 1, 2, and 3 would be the same.
Mm-hmm.
4 would be evaluations and length of service in the same criteria, in the same order of importance. 5 would be disciplinary history. 6 would be service to the college and other work history. 7 would be the same, supervisory recommendation.
For a question on that, do you explain your position on separating the disciplinary history from the performance evaluation? Would you not think that they're inextricably interwoven as far as usually a disciplinary element is correlated with performance evaluation?
Well, I think there are a lot of cases where it could be, but if something's reflected in the evaluation, then I don't think that same factor would necessarily get more weight just from also being attached to discipline. It's just kind of the same thing. I guess I didn't consider that specifically when we were talking about kind of the rationale here. What we heard several times was, well, what matters is the employee's ability to do the job, their performance. So rather than counter with putting like the service above that again, that didn't seem like it would be likely to get much traction. We're supposed to put those two on the same level. But yeah, I guess this is it is probably something that'll be back specific. I'm just trying to think of examples of disciplinary things that are and aren't going to be attached to evaluations in this context.
Right. So because if you might have a personnel evaluation of an employee who's doing a good job or remarkable work, and then employee who has a record of disciplinary action from the college, but the disciplinary action is relegated below the personnel evaluation, so, or above, right? Yeah, the personnel evaluation is relegated below the disciplinary history. So does that mean then the question will be, are we giving greater weight to the employee regardless of the disciplinary history compared to the employee who has outstanding evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the example I just sort of thought of was, what if you have an employee who has, 20 years of excellent evaluations, but they have a verbal reprimand for, I don't know, being, raising their voice and being ornery in a meeting or something, I don't know. And then you've got an employee who has 20 years of fair evaluations, but no discipline. Is that really something that should override 20 years of superior evaluations? I'm not sure it should.
Well, what kind of stuff would not be, what kind of disciplinary action would go into just a discipline file but never show up on an evaluation?
So ideally speaking, you would identify items like behavior. If someone is, there's items of behavioral.
And that wouldn't show up on a faculty evaluation?
It should.
It will.
It should. But you're looking
Would
at
it be not there?
Yeah.
So at some point it'll be
So-
there, depending on when that happens.
with behavior, performance, both of those should factor in.
Mhm.
Into the evaluation. You would like to think that the evaluation would encapsulate all items.
Mhm.
If you're looking at both behavior and performance, so we'll have it, both of which will be outlined in the evaluation for that evaluation period. If you have to address during that window, the fair thing to do would be to make sure that's reflected in the evaluation as well.
So it's more like you're looking at time, where if somebody was, say, written up for something, I don't know, back along, but their current evaluations are excellent, that's how that could happen. How you could have excellent evaluations and still have disciplinary action, that would be problematic.
I would.
Yeah, so if,
Yeah, you wouldn't want it that.
No.
How that
If it's
could happen.
informal discipline maybe, but then it's the lesser important stuff too, so.
What time of year do faculty get evaluated? They get evaluated at a certain
Usually
time.
fall.
So could there be a scenario where you get evaluated in the fall, but then something happens like in the early part of the new year?
right,
That's not gonna be on an eval for a whole nother maybe 12 months.
Correct.
Maybe you have a reduction in personnel.
please.
Thank
This is
you.
adjunct, but it certainly could apply to full-time as well. Because part of our responsibility as a faculty is to go into a clinical study. And if something happens at that clinical site, the clinical site says you may not return here, it means something major happened. And so it's not maybe in alignment with that evaluation period, but we have to address it. Because
Right.
that we can't go to clinical site, or that person can't. So meaning that we don't have it, we can't just pick up people and move them around. So that would be one example I could think of.
And the college, discipline can happen at any time based on the situation, but invariably, the evaluation is an annual evaluation. So somewhere in that annual evaluation, if that discipline happened during that year, it still needs to be addressed in the annual evaluation, just like we would non-faculty, right? If a non-faculty member engages in a particular problem that warrants some type of progressive disciplinary action, we're not going to redo the evaluation just for that. They'll get that disciplinary action, whatever formal reprimand, et cetera, but then in the annual evaluation, that will be addressed.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there are times where they don't match, basically.
Right, because we don't wait for the annual evaluation
Sure.
to inform a faculty, any employee that there's a disciplinary concern that we have, right?
It would just catch up at the next evaluation, basically.
But why don't you, if you guys are okay with it, doesn't sound like we're that far off.
Right.
Maybe put some language together and maybe throw into that number 3 or number 4 with the evaluation length of service, maybe a nod toward you post the discipline that post the last evaluation, if it hasn't been captured. Because that really to me is the one that
Correct.
is probably the only likely one that could come up. If it comes up in a scenario where it happened before the last evaluation, but it's not contained in it, then that's an indication to me it's not that important. That's probably the wrong phrase, but it's not in the grand scheme of things important enough to make it an evaluation, and that's on us as administrators. You got to make sure if it is important, it's in there. If it's not, then I sort of agree with your point, and it's probably not of the highest significance in making this kind of decision. I think, it's something we would want to talk further about, but if you can get that post-evaluation discipline, because that could be something significant, and it just hasn't happened because we haven't got to the next evaluation period. If we can cover that, then I don't know that we're that far off from what you're proposing, it seems to me.
Okay, well, do you want us to write something up and give it to you?
Yeah, I think that maybe go ahead and do that, or along
Yeah.
the lines of something that covers that.
Disciplinary history not reflected on the evaluation.
Yeah, or discipline that occurred after the last evaluation or something along those lines. The other thought I had, and I don't know, I'll just throw this out because just talking about that, it might be more palatable for us if we almost break up the evaluations in time period. I suppose I'm thinking of if you want evaluations to be ranked higher than these others, some weight on more recent evaluations, the last 5 years or whatever, with both of them being important. But I think that's a concern I see reflected a lot of times, is that somebody who's been there 30 years is good, and that's a positive. But if they have great evaluations, first 10 and really average, are they that much better than somebody who's been here 15, 20 years who has the opposite? Maybe starts out average and then has worked to be a great instructor. That may be getting too much in the weeds. Just, again, this is where you're
That's where
starting.
you get into why we're arguing.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm just throwing it out. Just
If
kick me if
someone's
you
about
like.
to retire, right? Like, this is why we're talking about this. That's not the issue. So.
All right, you figure out, put some language together, and we're not too far off. So you can try and kick me, but there's a thing right there.
Okay, we'll write something
Can I
up.
kick you?
and pass it across.
No, I said, if you want to just move on, just come on.
I was like, you have really long legs to be able to do that.
I know. It's like,
No, that was a
I was
joke.
like, I didn't realize it was.
Poor joke.
We did the
All right,
best option.
Article 7. No. I got my briefcase, which is like a suitcase, as you know, so.
Didn't go there. Played soccer, didn't you?
All right, where to?
Okay, Article 10. So, what we're kind of thinking, and this is less, not as well fleshed out as what we just talked about, but just wanted to kind of see, kind of get your thoughts. The idea of having a salary schedule, I think we've talked about this a lot the last couple of sessions. Having had lots of discussions in caucuses and in meetings outside of caucuses and just talking to faculty in general, it's an important enough issue that the union is willing to go to impasse over it. But we'd rather not do that. If we were to go to impasse over it, not something that would be resolved quickly or easily anyway. So what we were, just an idea we had, based on the discussion we had last time, there's a lot of work and research that needs to be done in order to come up with a rational salary schedule anyway. We don't know who 2+15 versus 2+30 are in the information we've received. We don't know how much experience people were credited with when they came in. It's not something that's nicely summarized in the spreadsheet. So rather than kind of posture over something that we know isn't going to be able to be made reasonable right now, we think we could probably agree to your compensation proposal if there were something in section 3 or elsewhere, but just kind of looking at section 3, just saying that basically, starting in 2021, there will be some kind of salary schedule, details to be determined, number of steps, number of lanes, the amounts between all those things. Not asking for a commitment on those, but just that, when next year rolls around and we've really had time to put the work in, that there just will be one. I don't want to call it necessarily kicking the can down the road, because it's not just something that we want to put because we want to put it off, but
What if we did this? Because I hear what you're saying, but I think I would not be overextending to say it's probably not something we're going to agree to, at least as we sit here now, and it might be an impasse item for us, which I obviously hate to get there, but we're a long way from that. Things could happen. What if we streamline the whole compensation thing? It seems to me that we can continue discussing all of that, but maybe we take everything out except for what are we doing right now for this academic year, and continuing to talk about the pros and cons of step plans and vice versa, vis-a-vis everything else that we'll be talking about over the next 6 months or so. In other words, it doesn't have to be dealt with today necessarily. There seems to be a little more urgency on this year. Maybe the easy thing is to take all of this out and just keep like section 2, for example. For this year, we'll do this, and we'll just keep talking about down the road, knowing that that's going to be a hurdle for all of us to figure out. And maybe once we get into the meat of some of the other things, there'll be some opportunities to look at compromises. I'm not optimistic, to be honest with you, but I hear what you guys are saying here. It's a big ticket item for you, there's no question. Same for us, but we are entering in academic year in a week or so. So that's something to consider.
okay.
The rest of it, because quite frankly, looking at the Article 10, Section 1 is really kind of just here's what we already do. So that would stay regardless of whether we reach any kind of agreement. TAs now, I mean, that's just the status quo. Whether that gets changed or not for the long haul would be subject to agreement down the road or impasse. And Section 3, like I said, is really just a nod to the fact that we got to continue work on beyond this year. Section 4 is really the last year too. So.
And one of the major concerns that faculty are hearing, let's be clear, I think faculty actually, they're not unhappy with this, right? The question is, what is the long-term intention of the faculty? Can you speak to how you think this retains the most excellent faculty? What attracts new faculty to come in to take this position? Is this what in this presentation speaks to that?
Yeah.
And particularly the facts of PhDs, and when they're going through they get their PhD, and there's absolutely no compensation. That's one of the kind of items that go with this, not even going with this.
Sure.
I mean, I would only speak generally to it that, same as with most institutions, what attracts your hope is competitive pay and benefits. And yeah, it'd be nice if we could look at it and say, well, 20 years out, I'll be making this, but there has to be some level of trust that we will take care of all employees, not just faculty, but all employees. Everybody's in the same boat in terms of benefits and pay. There are constraints, though, with budget and being able to project out. And to the point where I talked about last time, I don't remember if you were here, but we would have an issue with putting together a step plan, even if there was the idea of, let's not attach funds to it yet, but just have the structure in place. But I think that tends to complicate things because it acts, whether we mean it or not, as a promise that here's what we're going to do. And if something doesn't happen, then it backfires, and now you have a lot of morale issues, acrimony in the workplace. So it's tough to go year to year. Everybody understands that. It's just sort of the environment we're in through no fault of faculty, no fault really of administration. It's just the environment that Tallahassee has thrust upon us.
Yeah.
As I said, we're always
Did you
open
understand
to
what I'm
lobbying.
trying to get,
Right.
right? And we're not just speaking to people here at this table, but to people around.
Sure, and at the last meeting, we had a fairly protracted discussion about the impetus for unionization, regarding the longevity pay not being rolled into the base, regarding the educational attainment increase. And we discussed that. But the challenge is we empathize with that. but as Brian alluded to, when you have a finite allocation legislatively and multiple concerns impinging concurrently on decision making, we may not be able to meet all our constituents' preferences. So that's the struggle that we're all in.
Right.
You know.
Which is
So-
why we want to do some real research
Sure,
and make sure that it is right.
and we're not disputing that, and we support that. The other issue is, again, retention. There are other variables, I believe, very strongly that make PHSC an outstanding place to work. And we've heard that from our faculty. So in addition to the acknowledge the compensation, the wages, again, you have insurance, you have professional development opportunities, you have staff and professional development, you have opportunities where even though your salary is being adjusted in perpetuity when you earn a degree, the college will pay for you to go back to earn your degree. You know, so there are a lot of other benefits, not to mention the level of collegiality and the I think intrinsic motivation that comes with being a professor in a PHSC classroom. So I mean, it's very subjective, and I think it would be inappropriate just to say retention and the bringing in of new faculty and the retaining of excellent faculty is largely predicated on compensation. I would argue, having been here for almost 30 years, starting as a tenured faculty member, that the compensation is not chiefly among the determinants that will indicate whether or not I wish to stay. I mean, it's a consideration, but we don't have a massive exodus of faculty members leaving our college because of this. There are other opportunities, but that's not, we don't have a crisis of faculty members leaving us and not being able to retain them because of compensation. That's not what we've heard when they do leave. It's usually other variables. But it's legitimate, and we're not going to dispute the legitimacy of the concerns. But we're all in this together, truly.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I've heard, let's try and get, the state to give us more money, which I think obviously would be great. I think we'd be more than happy to, kind of be partners on that. It makes it much easier to do that.
Sure.
When people don't have an ability to say, well, it's them that are the enemy, not the state. And it's an easy, cost-free way to convey that to the faculty. I'm going to say cost-free, costs can be made to be negligible. After the discussion yesterday on, will this lead to more fractious labor relations in the future, I went and I actually pulled out my math grasping skills and did a little bit of data analysis on this. So what I did is I pulled all of every impasse that's ever been declared off the PERC website, going all the way back to 1995, which is when they keep them to. We have sort of a controlled experiment almost in this very thing. Starting in 2014-15, many school districts around the state, upheld by the legislature, got rid of salary schedule. The law to do that was passed in 2011, but didn't take full effect until the 2014-15 year. From 1995 up to 2014, the percent of total impasses declared around the state in the public sector, instructional contracts accounted for about 11%. In the 5 years since most of them did away with their salary schedules, instructional impasses have accounted for over 20% of impasses around the state. And having been the advocate in many of those impasses myself, it's these very things that we're talking about are what leads to these impasses, which is they've done away with the salary schedule. People just get 2%, $1,000, whatever, change from year to year. People don't know what to expect. Suspicion over money being hidden and all this kind of thing. Anecdotes aren't data. That's why I went and looked at the data, and that's exactly what we found. The proportion of impasses that have been coming from K-12 have doubled in the year since most of them were made to do away with their salary schedule. I wasn't necessarily expecting to see a huge difference either way, but based on the only evidence I think you can look at to sort of assess that claim, but it certainly doesn't seem to be going in that direction. Can't find
The
evidence.
question I would have there is, what prompted state to do that in 2011? What said, why was, if it was working great, did the state go after the step grants in that environment? And I don't know all the answers. I know that's a complicated question. If there's so many
It's been
factors.
wildcats across the
Yeah.
nation around teacher salaries and underfunded
Understand.
classrooms. I think we're all well aware of why it's an issue.
As well as growth as well. That's another factor. When you're looking at it across, if you're using K-12 as an example, you're looking at the growth of K-12, the number of schools being open, things of that nature to accommodate for classroom size to meet the state's guidelines for student to teacher ratio. So if you have to continue to build more schools, if you have to continue to employ more teachers in that respect, the step schedule was a hindrance because now you're saying that, okay, you have to keep pushing salaries for employees that were here, and then you have to go and hire more teachers at the newer schools, and you have to fund those schools, and you have to pay. So it's not just the one factor of just the salary to the teachers. And as you mentioned, we're all fighting for the same pot of money to come from the state. And if the state doesn't fund you, then how do you maintain those salaries? Some teachers may actually be okay with maintaining the salaries and looking at it and saying, you know what, these other individuals aren't going to have a job. And I kind of just, again, coming from private and then going to public and seeing how it works on both ends, I understand the difference between having some type of product that you're producing for profit and then coming in and saying, okay, we're delegated a certain amount of dollars from the state, and how do you manage the two, basically? I mean, how do you manage between one industry to the next, basically? It is somewhat difficult, basically. And trust me, I think teachers do an awesome job and they should get paid, but at the end of the day, we get our pot of money from the state.
At the end of the day, I guess it's fine if they don't.
Well, I mean, not
I don't think you
mean,
understand how.
No, I actually do. I've helped process quite a few teachers at K-12 and now being here at higher ed. So I'm looking at it through the lens of, yes, they do a phenomenal job. I've been in those classrooms where teachers are doing a job. The problem is that I'm also not the one making the final decision as to what's allocated statewide in the Department of Education. So if none of us are in that room making that final decision, how we're all we're put in a predicament where we have to make tough decisions where how do you maintain the standard of education for our students, whether it be a higher ed or K-12, and then at the same time still maintain the standards for our employees. The student is a driver first and foremost. Then after that, all of us as employees, we come after the student. So if I have to maintain my standard of education for the students, then I have to say, okay, how do I keep my employee group up to par as well? And sometimes the tough decisions come into play there, and it's not going to be a decision that all parties are going to be happy with sometimes. I would love, then they always try to find a middle ground. I would love to make every single person happy. That's my job, regardless of whether or not we have a bargaining unit or no. My job is to make sure that I service all employees. But then if I'm looking at it and I know that one employee is not going to be happy about something, it is tough, and I empathize with that employee, whether they think I do or not. My job is to always do the right thing for all employees, regardless of type. Absolutely.
It's not about you.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
Well, I think, let me just say this, I think we're all on the same page. We know the limitations here because of the budget, state budget, and a lot of the money we get is restricted. We haven't had tuition increases in a number of years. Maybe some of that doesn't continue, but we still have to feel out the current administration and legislature. But it is where we are, and looking at data, what I would look at is what if we went back in time 5-6 years and had installed the plan that you want installed now, knowing what happened with the budget, we would have fallen short on a lot of trying to keep up to date with that and what would have happened. I still think that maybe doesn't result in impasses where we can say this percentage increases, but just the morale and things of that nature, I think we would have had a problem. And I think that's what would drive the turnover, frankly. If I saw in your contract that I should be 10 years on making this amount, I'm not, I'm unhappy, I'm looking for jobs elsewhere.
Or if you don't have security because the college cannot afford to run programs. So right now, when we do program viability analyses, we understand that not all programs are going to be revenue producing. They're not going to create a profit, but there's a clear need of why we have programs. And they may still be losses to the institution, but those losses still involve personnel. So if a decision were to be made, where we have to make difficult choices. At one time we were freezing positions that we did not hire. We felt the pressure. We talked about this last time, the pressure of having frozen positions. Last time we hired more than 10 faculty members. So not knowing if my program is going to be sound, or not knowing if other units at the institution are going to be sound, that there'll be dramatic cost-cutting measures because of not having the ability to meet those obligations that we expressed contractually, could also be, problematic when it comes to turnover.
How do our faculty schedules compare to other colleges if you listen to that? That's our benefits. The faculty's
Hours is
salaries
better.
and benefits.
Dee Boyette from Seminole State College did all the fact books for the past 10 years, and the median salary of each of the community colleges for the past 10 years. And HSC median salary is about the median for the two. So we're right now.
But they also,
Now, some like Miami-Dade who get paid a lot more because.
Yes,
of
Right,
yeah,
depends
so
on the
again,
school.
there's a couple that are outliers and get a lot more, but our median is pretty much the median.
Who would be our comparable schools, like for
medium-sized schools.
medium-sized, semi-rural?
Semi-rural.
Well, you have to look at anybody who's a medium-sized college, so Seminole would be one. Florida State College, Jacksonville.
How about benefits? Do we have any idea of how our
A lot of them
benefits
are a lot of them are moving towards having benefit employees paid for benefits. They have moved to that model already. We have not. So that becomes, an added piece. So even with the median salary, if you factor that in and say, okay, how much are those employees paying into their benefit plans, then it lowers their salary essentially. We have not moved to that model. Hopefully, we won't have to. Ever move to that model.
There are other unionized state colleges that have steps. HCC has one, I don't know off the top of my head all of them. But I know HCC has a step system and they're providing, so it might be worth keeping like HCC reading it. If they can do it, I'm sure that we can. If we have the same state budget, they have the same state budget issues rather, they have the same tuition, not increasing issues. If they can do it, then.
And more wrap this up, all we're asking is that we reopen this. It's June to June, but that's how it's performance. We'll do the research. We're ready for the next school.
I don't think if we would commit to implementing it, certainly without looking at what it looks like, we would commit to further discussion about that. I think that's where we are as a great firm. And I do think it's a good idea to ask around at other institutions and see what they have in experiences, because that certainly would add to the discussion.
Yeah, and that's important, the entire package. And, Florida College of Jacksonville is a very different location, different area, different economic climate than Pasco and Hernando. So we'd have to look certainly at the schools that are more of the IPED schools and more sister schools as far as FTE and location. I think that has a lot to do with it. And also look in the entire package. So you bring in all wages, all benefits, all other continuing education, those types of, what's their contract? They have 2-term contracts, 3-term contracts. Recall, I think one thing that it's important to note is that at one time at the institution, remember, faculty had 3-term contracts. They had to work in the summertime. And part of their load involved teaching 2 classes in the summertime. The college at the time decided to move to a 2-term contract, no longer require faculty to have to work in the summer, So, and then on top of that, give a salary differential bump compared to adjunct. So full-time faculty members, if they chose to work in the summertime, they would earn a salary or a payment that is beyond the adjunct. There was a bump. And we honored that, and we're still true to that. On an annual basis, it costs the college $2 million or more to pay faculty a higher differential, plus staff those summer positions with adjunct faculty. That's an area that we're absorbing, and we're honoring that contract. So there are a lot of other variables in there that oftentimes people don't talk about, that are the hidden realities that we have to contend with because it's part of our contract. And we're not arguing that's a problem, but it's a reality that we have to address. So when we're looking at those, we just want to make sure that you look at all of those variables and that there's an equitable comparison.
I know UFF is looking at the benefits package. The UFF is comparing all the benefits right now, but we don't have those data yet.
Sure. That'll be a good starting point.
Yeah, I was just curious about that. Of course, I joined the college in 2006, so they did not have the mandatory teach summer school.
Yeah.
So is that something they could reverse on ever, or is that just, or is it done that they will never mandate to teach during the summer? Oh,
You mean whether or not you go to a 3-term, go back to a 3-term?
yeah, well, I mean.
And
right
that's
now we
subject to
have-
One subject to
negotiation.
negotiation.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I was just curious about that.
We haven't proposed that if that's something that the union's interested in, certainly.
Oh.
Negotiation.
No, I mean, no, I just wanted.
Do you want to go back to that?
No, no.
Okay.
No, I just wanted you to have that protection.
I thought you were suggesting to go back to that. Okay.
No, no,
Honestly, I don't know if they would have enough summer classes for all of us to teach. That would make for numbers. I'm not even sure that would.
Yeah, we did at one time, and we've done the analysis where we would. You would, because if you look at the number of adjunct faculty we're hiring right now, plus a good proportion, and I can't tell you the percentage right now, but a good proportion of our full-time faculty wish to teach and do teach 2 or 3 classes every summer.
Mhm.
So there's, and our summer classes are very robust. But that's, the only reason I invoke that is for you to appreciate when you're doing these analyses that there are other variables there that the college is, has to absorb by virtue of the contract that often are not spoken about.
The fact book comparison was based on an 2-term.
2 terms, yeah.
So she adjusted all of the salaries based on if there were 3 terms or 2 terms. Versus that was accounted for in that.
It was, okay.
And I appreciate that.
Kaylin, are you also looking at how many credit hours have been required in teaching?
Yeah,
semester
so she
below? Because
adjusted
some of
it.
our sister institutions require 18 a
Correct.
semester, and we're only requiring 15.
I'll have to look at that, but I believe she adjusted everything based on 30 credits per year.
And the other is the work week. We have a 25 plus 5 versus a 40-hour work week. That's another thing to look at.
Sure, I don't know about that. Regardless, we're right.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's kind of, again, there's 2 things going on there. One is, sort of the bread and butter issue, and the other is the salary structure issue. I haven't seen an indication of a strong desire to go to impasse to get, bigger raises or anything like that. As far as kind of dealing with the issues in front of us, it's all interesting to know, but I don't know that it's necessarily all that relevant to the salary structure issue, which is one that we've very consistently, very passionately heard about. And the only reason I brought up, again, the sort of data here is, thus far, the only reason we've really heard against it is, well, the promise can't be honored, and maybe that leads to labor relations issues in the future. And I thought that just to see if that seemed to be the case, and it couldn't project the null hypothesis there. I'd be happy to share that if you want to look at it and do something else, but it's a pretty stark difference. I mean, we see consistently, 9-10% a year instructional contract at impasse, or representing 9-10% of impasses, and then it just immediately jumps up to consistent 21%, 20%, and so far this year, 27%. I mean, it's just the idea that that not having a structure is a way to smooth labor relations is just not something that's borne out by the lived experience of unions and employers in Florida.
So would you be willing to accept Mr. Cody's language about that? And again, to some degree, that's even addressed here, subject to negotiation with your parties. So pay increases, if any. I mean, we can put some other language in there that says that we're going to continue the dialogue about it, rather than we're going to do it, because that clearly would be probably to put the college in an inappropriate bind by committing to do it. But certainly that's part of the negotiation process. We're open to it. But when you brought about impasse, the 2% as a package, we've made a lot of progress. I think when you look at how many agreements we have, how many articles we have PA'd, and comparatively with some of the more contentious and a lot of discord in these negotiations, I think there's been a collegial effort. I think both parties recognize that we're trying to do the best we can for the institution, given the circumstances. So I would hope that you consider that language, that we are certainly open to discussing it, rather than immediately believing that we're at that point where that threshold that it's going to lead to impasse. Because if it does go to impasse, but then what? I mean, if we don't have the resources, we don't have the resources. That was the last question I brought last meeting. No one's disputing the concerns. It's just, how do we get there? But we need to, how are we going to get to where you want to be, given the parameters that we're encountering?
Well, again, the only parameter with respect to the structure itself is the issue of potentially fractious labor relations. And again, we can fiddle with the numbers. That's why we're offering to continue to work on this. And the numbers can be arranged such that the cost is truly negligible. I'm going to put together salary schedules where the total impact of the increase in payroll is, measured in the tenths of a percent. So just funding it is not the issue. What I'm hearing the issue is we don't want to make what appears to be a promise that we can't keep, and then have to deal with, issues down the road.
Right. I hear all you're saying, but then why is it an impasse issue for you guys? What if it's not a promise, even a soft promise? What's the issue? The reality is that's exactly how it's going to be perceived.
Because the reality right now is nobody knows if they'll get anything next year or the next year.
I understand.
And so I understand the issue with funding. Okay, I just wrote Governor DeSantis and asked him about tuition increases, and I'm looking forward to his response. I understand that, but I still have pride in working with them. But also my salary is important to me, and it's important to a lot of other people as well. And I can tell you, 2 people that are looking, if they don't have anything to look forward to down the road, they'll be out of here probably after this year. And they'd like to stay, but money is important, and so we need to have some kind of, even if we can't fund it this year, some kind of expectation that maybe I'll get something instead of, well, if the administration is nice, they'll give us a 2% non-recurring next year. People can't, live on that. That's the problem. Is right now there's nothing to look forward to. There's nothing to even have an expectation, because when I read this, there's no change in the compensation. That's where the problem is, and that's what I'm hearing from faculty. Is that we need something to say that maybe we'll get something, but right now that doesn't say that.
Could always do a forward clause.
Yeah, the issue, there's lots of issues, but the simplest can be boiled down to is, would the college even like there to be, the sort of aspiration of being able to ascend up the ladder of compensation? if that's the case, then let's put that in writing. So the faculty can see that, okay, well, the college would like to do this, it all depends on the funding. What can we do to get the funding? Maybe that involves, legislative engagement, maybe that involves other things. So if we can't even get, something in writing saying that the college wants to do this, then it becomes a much harder sell to the faculty that it's not your guys' fault that, salaries are stagnant and that sort of thing. When they see that, when they see that sort of mutual agreement between the union and the employer that this kind of thing is a good idea. We know we can't fund it every year. There may be a recession. We only fund it for 5 or 6 years. Happens all over the place in K-12, and some of the years where there was the lowest rate of impasses were those 2009, 2010 years. So if faculty can't see that it's even important for the administration to aspire to that sort of thing, then they're going to continue to see administration as the obstacle rather than, the messenger, as it were. I don't know what else there is that can be said beyond that. We've heard this rhetoric. If you guys don't expect it to be funded, why is it important to you? It's important that faculty see that it's something that administration puts, that makes a priority and even wants to have happen. I mean, if there's no written, or expressed desire to make that happen, then what can we do?
Well, I think we all understand your position. Let us continue to brainstorm it on our end. Maybe there's some alternative. And I'm optimistic about the proposal that, as you presented it, but let's see if we can come up with something that addresses those concerns and is something the administration can live with.
Okay, and we'll, when we break again, we'll work on, an actual change to Article 10 to kind of have it more concretely what our kind of idea is.
Do you want to break now? Do you have anything on the others?
Yeah, a couple other things. In Article 12, this came up. They're really kind of, as expected, there's nothing really in dispute in the recertification or the rank pieces. In the continuing contract, there are kind of two things that came up as points of concern. One is at the bottom of page 1, they're extending onto page 2, satisfactory completion of the following, and then it lists a few things. There's interest in having some more flexibility as to kind of what sorts of things could be taken. There are people who have taken, the 2 seminars, for instance, those are the only 2 very specific requirements. People have said, well, I took this kind of thing in grad school and it was kind of a waste of time for me to do it again, or things like that. So could I instead do something else instead of that? I mean, is there some sort of statute, right? Something disciplinary, or maybe other courses in pedagogy or something like that. Just some people are just finding that they aren't getting a whole lot of value out of that. So the question was, is there some sort of statutory or accreditation reason that it has to be those specific things, or is there room for flexibility there?
Well, we do have room for flexibility, and that's the last one, where it says the equivalent graduate or undergraduate level course approved by the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Faculty Development College Provost. So I can tell you, since I'm responsible for approving those, I do get regularly faculty members who petition to me to have either graduate school, doctoral level work, master's level work in education-related areas that they make an argument might have some level of equivalency. And I can also tell you that I have not denied any of those requests. I've approved all of those requests that come to me because they've had cogent arguments articulating the equivalency. So I think the concerns of the individuals with whom you've spoken, they can be addressed with that option right there. It currently exists. So an example, so someone has an EDD in higher education with a nursing curriculum background, and this faculty member may have taken a bevy of courses in curriculum design, etc., some generic, but most related to nursing. Well, clearly, if she shared with me her transcripts, her course abstracts, etc., there was the reasonableness that the argument could be made that she satisfies this criteria. Now this is, we're not talking about the e-learning and technology, that's separate and distinct. But the other ones, Graham, I think we already have that opportunity for faculty to petition for equivalency. Because I think if you start getting into enumerating other like disciplines or areas, etc., then that might be a tighter stricture on that. This allows a faculty member to petition to make the request.
Okay, so,
And it's worked for us. And it's worked for faculty.
right, okay, so I'm glad to hear that, faculty are explaining themselves and not being denied for it. I guess the concern would be, kind of long term. If there's someone different in the position who has
Not as
much
great as
more, much
No,
more
not as great
restricted-
as, well, thank you very much. We approved the entire contract.
Our weak spot.
There you go. I'm no longer chairing this.
But, that could happen. So, would there be any openness to some language saying, I'm really shooting from the hip here, but something to the effect of, not being unreasonably denied or something like that?
I was going to suggest we use that language in other areas of the contract, which, we have the approval language here, add a phrase which won't be unreasonably withheld or something along those lines. I don't see why we wouldn't be open to something like that if you want to propose that.
Okay, we'll talk about it. We might see what's that's not good enough. I don't know. Just trying to get a sense of.
There's got to be some time, is that there's some tie-in to the educational context, that we respect the fact that someone's coming in with discipline-specific knowledge, but we also want to make sure that the faculty member has an appreciation of all the variables relevant to teaching, particularly in higher education. So to that extent, so long as there's some opportunity for the individual to express themselves and provide the evidence, we haven't had a problem. But I wouldn't have no problem with putting the unreasonableness clause in there.
Okay, we'll talk about it. The other issue more generally, I'm trying to find it in our original proposal, but we mentioned he felt kind of timeline was very restrictive. And I get that, we were writing a first proposal, we kind of just threw in everything we could think of. But we do think there needs to be some timelines for some more things. And Caitlin was telling us that there, at some point, I don't know when, but at some point there's been faculty who have been, preparing to teach fall classes sort of imminent, and they haven't heard whether or not they actually got a contract yet. So, are there particular pieces of that timeline that you felt were less tenable than others, that we could talk about whether or not we actually want those particular pieces?
Well, again, that was history, and I appreciate that, Caitlin, but things have changed, right? So things have changed. So this last continuing contract process, an example of what transpired, they were approved. The dean sent forward the portfolio reviews. I reviewed them. I approved them, sent the recommendation to Dr. Beard. President Beard approved them. We include them through human resources on the board agenda. The board approved them, and then immediately after that, within a week, I specifically sent notification to the respective faculty members congratulating them on having obtained a continuing contract, and that they will be receiving that beginning of the fall term. So the notification process has dramatically improved.
Part of what I think when we were looking at is the timeline is the initial proposal.
Right.
Is
Exactly.
very structured in terms of every single step, which always causes me great heartburn on my end because
Yes.
invariably reality sets in and something gets missed. Maybe something, and I don't know. And again,
You're correct.
kick me if I'm
You're correct.
overstepping, but we may not have an issue with an overall timeline that's
Mhm.
instead of each step, where you're kind of setting yourself up for failure if something happens. A more big picture timeline, if that makes sense. And the other part that, again, from the legal perspective, when we get in the way, is what happens if the timeline gets missed, or how rigid and black and white is the timeline. We don't want to be in a position where we're either saying, okay, you missed a timeline, now the candidate's saying you have to grant the continuing contract status. But on the other hand, we don't want to be in a position where we're, because of the timeline, we're denying it,
Right.
or we're feeling rushed and we're not giving it the proper consideration. So some way to soften the timeline a little bit to account for reality. And it may be those extenuating circumstances language that we've used elsewhere that might be. So this is just off the top of my head, Karen, kind of thinking out loud, but I don't know if you want to take a stab at that kind of language. That I think would fly certainly a lot better than the rigid step-by-step timeline.
Yeah, quite candidly, the feedback I've received from the academic deans is that they have had some challenges with making certain that faculty are complying and being ushered through this process. And if we already, as open-ended as our process currently is, if you were to erect these specific stringent expectations, would all the faculty be capable of meeting them? I mean, like, speaking on behalf of the faculty, we also want to make sure that whatever you put in here, that it's doable for the faculty team. So, more big picture, contextual would be more appropriate.
All right, so I think that was all things we had to ask about. So we'll work on some things here. So I guess, if we're not able to kind of resolve every other thing that's sort of in here, I think at one point you mentioned that the possibility would be to just do sort of like a side MOU for the 2% or $1,000 thing. Just kind of, make it happen while we deal with everything else. Is that something that is still hard?
What we would want as an MOU is something pairing the benefit and salary for this year. And I don't know that we're not really proposing any real substantive changes on the benefit side. But I don't know if deductions and deductibles or things are getting tweaked as they typically do every year, those kinds of things. I don't know that that's happening or not happening, or we even have final decisions on that. But pairing those together, leaving everything open for future, makes sense in our minds so that we can at least go into this next year all on the same page.
Okay, we'll work on that.
And separate, related but separate and apart from that, if we can't get the MOU, then institutions faced with the decision of do we go forward with those changes anyway or not. And if you guys are comfortable sharing it, we would like to know what your view is as to whether or not that would be within our rights to do. I mean, not that we're necessarily going to be swayed, but I know we had the similar wage issue last year, and I think my recollection, union took the position, well, we shouldn't have done that, but we're okay with it. I'd rather not have a disagreement over that. Our review at the time was, well, we have the right to do it, but yeah.
Well, you did that. We didn't mention that, but of course.
No, but I mean,
it was
however the
technically
optics
illegal.
are.
We should have done it, but we won anyway.
No problem with that.
I would rather
Quote,
do it
unquote.
with an understanding from both sides so we can present it as the, here's what the parties have agreed to, obviously, since we're in this process. But we ultimately would have to make a decision if we don't reach an agreement on that, or at least an understanding, however formal that is. And we haven't made that decision. I don't think I can fairly say we have to discuss that with the president. So do we just go ahead and provide it? Because on one hand, we don't want faculty to be left out of that. On the other hand, it is part of this process here. So to be all candid, we haven't made that decision, but I'm hoping not to have to make the decision. Not me, the administration. So that's the backdrop, but the preference is to try and work that stuff out if we can through TA and then into our MOU, or just maybe an MOU on those two.
We'll be able to have a decision on that no later than tomorrow. Because right now I'm currently sitting on that and processing, so it would be nice if we can have, I hate to put a rush on it, but we are trying to, from the HR standpoint, process all of these things. And I have obviously two different buckets here that I'm working with. And if we can do it all at one time, then obviously that would be the ideal situation versus.
Right, that's the timeline we're working on. The next session is not till, I think, July 30th. So if we don't do anything by then, we've made a decision by inaction. So if we don't have anything done today, then we're going to end up talking to Darrell, the president or whatever, and saying either do it or don't, or delay it to the 30th or what. I can see he's concerned about the logistics, as you should be, because you're the one that's going to have to carry it out.
Is there anything else? Take a break and-
11:45, what do you want to just come over, or what are you thinking?
For the next half hour or so.
All right. And we'll look at potential other areas for next time too, and give some thoughts.